very clear, we're not going to take a bad deal. And we don't know if we'll get there in the next 24 hours. Obviously, we believe that Congress should not act while we negotiate. They should let our negotiators try to do their job. But if the Iranians can't make the decisions they need to, regardless of what Congress does, we can't get to an agreement here. That's what we're trying to see if can happen in the next day or so.
State Department spokesperson Marie Harf on MSNBC's Morning Joe earlier today, as we're coming up on 24 hours before the deadline in those nuclear talks with Iran. With Miranda Khan, J.D. Hayworth welcoming you into America's Forum on this very busy Monday.
Yes, it is. Iran's lead negotiator said a deal is, quote, doable despite a few issues, while Britain's Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond said that any deal must put the bomb, quote, beyond Iran's reach.
Meanwhile, as has been reported on our parent website, Newsmax.com, a former top aide to the Iranian president who has defected says the U.S. is, quote, working on behalf of Tehran. For more on this developing story, we're pleased to be joined by the former director of both the CIA and the NSA, retired Air Force General Michael Hayden, who is on the telephone with us this morning. We're also joined from Newsmax Washington by my old congressional colleague, Michael Patrick Flanagan. Gents, to you both, our thanks. And General Hayden, let's start with the statement from the Iranian defector. Do you put stock in it? As amazing as it sounds, do you believe that the U.S. is basically trying to cop a plea for Iran with our allies?
J.D., I probably don't. Now, I do think what he might be pointing out is that of the Perm 5+1 negotiating with the Iranians, we may not be the toughest negotiator. In fact, according to press accounts, the French have been the most demanding interlocutor for the Iranians. So he may be reflecting our turning to the French and trying to get the French to be a bit softer in some of their demands. But I would be really reluctant to say that we're negotiating on behalf of Tehran.
General, maybe negotiation is maybe the wrong word, and it's used incoherently here. I think maybe what the defector is saying is that we're using our influence with the other European members, speaking a closer language and having a closer relationship to them to bring them closer to a deal. And in that are working toward a deal and the Iranian position. Maybe that's what the guy meant. Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, Michael, it really is, because I think all of us on this call can agree that this has become the lodestar of the current administration's foreign policy. Everything is being organized around this. Frankly, I think what we do or don't do in Yemen, do or don't do in Iraq, do or don't do in Syria, even how much we're willing to press Vladimir Putin in the Ukraine is a byproduct of this intense passion on the part of the President and Secretary Kerry to get this deal. And I think you all recognize that when you're in a negotiation with a country that's as good at negotiations as the Iranians, the last thing you want to be is the person in the room most interested in getting to yes.
General, you mentioned intense passion on behalf of the Secretary and the President. Some have suggested that Secretary Kerry is just doing this to basically win a Nobel Peace Prize and to help his chances of running for president.
Well, Miranda, I don't know that, but he has approached this in an interesting way and maybe even unorthodox. Usually the Secretary of State is the closer. And if you notice, as we're getting into this final stretch here, other foreign ministers are now coming into Lausanne. Kerry's there all the time. He's become the negotiator. It's hard for me to remember another time when a Secretary of State cleared his desk to become the negotiator rather than the person above the negotiations. And Miranda, just as a matter of technique, even in a job less important than this one, like at CIA, you really wanted your staff to go in there, roll their sleeves up, and go bare knuckles with the other guy so you could stay above the fray and make those final demands or final concessions. We've reversed that in this case.
General Hayden, John Kerry's personal intervention in these talks and his direct role in these talks notwithstanding, there is another development today that basically is throwing up red flags, a report that Iran will not be sending its stockpile of uranium to Russia or to any other third party. When we come back, General Hayden, we want to get your thoughts on that. Is that, for all intents and purposes, a deal breaker? Obviously, there is a lot more, both to the negotiations going on in Switzerland and to our discussion. And we'll be back with more after this timeout from America's Forum.
This is the end of non-proliferation, and it's all Barack Obama's fault, the man who I voted for, and the man who's making a terrible mistake on nuclear policy in the Middle East.
Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz, last week on this program, not happy with the man whom he supported for president, Barack Obama, in
I'd say that was an understatement.
Yeah, it was really something to hear that from Alan Dershowitz. With Miranda Kahn, J.D. Hayworth on the anchor desk. Joining us to continue our conversation via telephone, retired Air Force General, former head of the CIA and NSA, Michael Hayden, and from Newsmax, Washington, my old congressional colleague, Michael Patrick Flanagan. Now, General Hayden, before the break, we set up the other major story today that Iran is saying, you know, on second thought, we don't want to send our uranium stockpile to Russia or anywhere else. In your mind, General, is that enough just to kill this deal outright?
Damn close in my point of view, JD. You know, you had Marie Harfon earlier, essentially repeating the mantra that no deal is better than a bad deal. And that's certainly true. But you know what we're going to start to hear pretty soon, JD? We're going to start to hear, once we get something sort of on paper, and that's another issue we need to talk about, how much of this is going to be written down. But when we get something sort of on paper, we're going to stop talking about no deal or bad deal, and people are going to try to sell us the quote-unquote best possible deal. This is the best possible deal we could get. And frankly, that's not the same thing as a good deal. And we should never, ever concede that in the debate that's going to be coming up. And then, JD, there's another flag word that we all should be looking for here as this comes out. When we don't get something that we were led to believe all along we were expecting to get, the cover story is that we have arrived at a, quote, creative solution, unquote. Distrust all creative solutions, JD. And what's going to happen here, if the Iranians get their way and this stuff isn't shipped out, we will then agree to a, quote, creative solution that allows the Iranians to keep the stuff in Iran. Be very, very suspicious of that.
Yeah, General, a creative solution was really good for the Czechs in 1938 and 39. I got to ask you this, though. As an observer of this from a national security point of view, with the Saudis now saying, well, we're going to need a bomb to balance the Iranians, and obviously anticipating the Iranians getting one, breaking the deal, lying, doing whatever they have to do to get it done, and with the exposure of the formerly classified, now declassified data about Israel and their nuclear capacity, and Professor Dershowitz's observation about the end of proliferation, do you really think that we are kind of playing brinksmanship here in order to get a deal? Are we in deep trouble with lots of other countries now looking to get a bomb to protect themselves on a mid-level basis?
We are, Michael. I truly think we are. We have really disturbed our Sunni allies, and it's just not on the nuclear negotiations. As you know, they've got a whole list of things that they feel as if we have pulled the rug out from under them. But look at it this way. Right? Let's assume this is a good enough deal for the Iranians not to get a bomb. Now, I'm not assuming that, and I've got a list of things I'm looking for in the agreement here. But let's just assume that for the moment. In any event, Michael, we're going to leave Iran as an industrial-strength nuclear state. And so a deal that's designed to prevent a nuclear competition between the Shias and the Sunnis are going to give the Shia such an industrial base, such a nuclear industrial base, that the Sunnis are going to want one of those for themselves too, because the successful deal will give the Iranians so much that the Sunnis are now going to want to be competitive with it. And so I don't think this is going to cap this race. And in fact, in its own way, it might inspire it.
General, in the short time that we have remaining, real quickly, let's switch gears to ISIS. Syrian President Bashar Al-Assad was on 60 Minutes last night and had a very interesting response to whether airstrikes are actually working in defeating ISIS in his country. Take a listen, and we want to get your response.
ISIS has expanded since the beginning of the strikes, not like some American wants to sugarcoat the situation as to say that it's getting better. ISIS has been defeated and so on. Actually, no.
In the 30 seconds that we have remaining in this segment, real quickly, do you think this is just political posturing, or do you think this is an honest assessment of the situation?
I don't know the situation on the ground. I talked to my friends still in government. They claim they're punishing ISIS quite a bit. I don't think the strategy is coherent yet, Miranda. And by the way, both things could be true. We could be punishing them, and they could still be expanding. I mean, the truth might be it could be a lot worse if we hadn't been bombing.
General Hayden, obviously there is so much going on that we are in need of your wisdom and counsel and evaluation on a number of items. So we thank you for the fact you're going to stay with us through this break. Coming back, more with General Michael Hayden, my old congressional colleague Michael Patrick Flanagan, and you as America's Forum continues here from Newsmax TV. It is worth repeating our top story this morning as seen on our parent website, Newsmax.com. A former top aide to Iran's President Hassan Rouhani, who defected in Switzerland while working as a journalist covering the talks there, says the U.S. essentially is working on behalf of Iran. Now, this former presidential aide who defected as a journalist says he doesn't see a point to his profession in a country where the government is telling him what to write. He says the U.S. negotiating team at the nuclear talks essentially, again, is advocating on behalf of Iran. Let's continue our conversation now with retired Air Force General, the former chairman of both the NSA and the CIA, Michael Hayden, and my former congressional colleague, Michael Patrick Flanagan. General Hayden, I don't know if there's a hard and fast rule about defectors, but certainly during your time in the military and in our intelligence community, you had to deal with some of them. Are there Hayden's rules on dealing with defectors and evaluating their information?
Yeah, JD, there are. The first thing, defectors are very valuable. By definition, defectors aren't happy people, okay? They're leaving because they're very unhappy in their old circumstance. So you need to take the information they give you and bump it up against all the other data that you have. I trust our security services, our agencies are all over these negotiations, learning everything they can, the things that the Iranians want to share with us and the things the Iranians don't want to share with us. So now you take this story and you hold it up against that database, and it gives you additional data points, confirms or denies, explains, illuminates things that you've already had. I would give you, though, one caveat going in, JD. The first instinct you've got to have is that a defector wants you to think he is your friend and you should be his friend. And so if he's got something interesting or even interesting that he's willing to exaggerate, he's going to tell you that first. Excuse me, so that you accept him. So again, really important, but hold it up to the light now. And by the way, JD, we've done this 3 or 4 minutes now, not inconsistent with what we fear, which makes it even more troubling, doesn't it?
It does, General. In Iran, where information is filtered, much as it was in the old Soviet state, by the government, and where journalists write largely what they're told to write, does that add extra credibility to this journalist's defection, that he's actually looking to tell a story he might not be able to tell in Tehran?
It does. It plays to motivation. That look, we use a lot of things to motivate sources. Some of them are pretty noble, like idealism. Others are not, like ego and money and coercion and so on. Here's a fellow who seems to want to talk to us based upon an ideal with which we share with him, freedom of the press. So again, it begins to establish the relationship you have to establish with a potential news source. And again, coming at us arguing for the lack of press freedom, that's a pretty good first step on his part and ours.
Michael, General Hayden, I have to ask you this question. We just now talked about your rules for defectors. What about diplomats who seem to go native in the old parlance of our British cousins? Because there was a report about Secretary Kerry this weekend in the coverage tweeting out, "We will get a deal done, Allah willing." That's what a reporter for an online publication, you see the tweet right here, Laura Rosen said John Kerry gave her in Arabic when asked about the status of these negotiations, saying, "Inshallah, Allah willing, we will get a deal done." Is this just embracing the cultural norms of Iran?
Yeah, I think it is. And, it's interesting, and you can almost have a smile at it, but I wouldn't get over-concerned about it. What I would be over-concerned about, JD, remember before I said he's in the negotiation. He's not above them. Now he's become identified with success. He's not the senior detached from the process that can make the objective judgment. He's now become a team with Zarif, his Iranian foreign minister partner, and a dynamic develops over time. That team now becomes a unity against both countries' home establishments. And again, you really need to be careful about that because it's not just predictable, JD, that is an inevitable dynamic. And now we've got our Secretary of State being the one in there rather than out of there trying to make firm, objective, final judgments.
Gentlemen, in the 2.5 minutes that remain, I need to get your reaction. Video has appeared on the internet taken in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, of all places recently. The footage shows military and law enforcement training in a martial law style drill. Now, I'm just curious to both you gentlemen who have military resumes, though obviously General Hayden, you spent a lot more time there. You may not be able to see this video, but I'm just wondering in general, did we often have domestic military drills dealing with the imposition of martial law or dealing with civil unrest?
Not to my knowledge, JD, but to my knowledge, this exercise is designed to stretch our muscles, stretch our legs, practice a bit for support to local law enforcement authorities from the armed forces of the United States. I've been reading about it. You certainly can say, is this a wise thing to do, given American sensitivities right now to the overreach of central government power? I don't think it's in any way malicious or malevolent, but you might want to mark them down for style points at the moment.
Well, obviously, this thing going on in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Michael Patrick Flanagan, I know a lot of students are on spring break, but to do this right now in that kind of situation, in the minute that remains, your reaction to it?
I want to agree with the General. I desperately want to agree with General Hayden that there's nothing malicious about this. But I got to also observe that U.S. cities don't look like cities in the Middle East or other places where we might be. I don't know what value this exercise has outside of dealing with a modern Western city. Maybe this is an exercise aimed at some eventual incursion in the Ukraine. Perhaps that's part of what we're thinking. Maybe we have to think, the military chiefs are thinking we're looking more at European wars again rather than at other countries around the world. We need to be prepared for them. Like the General, I'm kind of bending over backwards trying to find a way to put a good face on this, but it is disturbing, and I really think it's insensitive and kind of stupid.
Suffice it to say, we will keep an eye on similar drills scheduled for the American Southwest in the next few weeks. Right now, a Newsmax Now update.